We're here with Isabel Pedersen of UOIT, that's the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. And Isabel is the Canada Research Chair in Digital Life, Media and Culture, and she's also the Director of Decimal, the Digital Culture and Media Lab at UOIT. She's written a great paper with Samantha Reid, her co-author, and it's titled Home is Where the AI Heart Is. And she's joining us today because the paper's been accepted into a special issue of IEEE Technology and Society magazine on the theme of the unintended consequences, the paradox of technological potential. Welcome to the program, Isabel.
Thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction.
Thank you. We first met at the International Symposium of Technology and Society in Toronto. It was an honor to have you there as an invited speaker. And we've been looking at your work from afar. Tell us what the last sort of 2 or 3 years have been about in your research life.
Well, I think that I've been still fascinated by personal technologies and technologies attached to the body and the great transformation that we're undergoing when it comes to our own personal technologies and ultimately the digital cloud that we're creating around ourselves. I think over the past few years, since the last time we met, I'm more and more interested in implanted technology and the coming future that will involve us in implanting technology or in moving towards that through nanotech and nanotech miniaturization. I'm fascinated by convergence of so many other technologies that are also entering this space, sort of big data, smart home technology, the rise of bionic parts, sort of the morphing of wearables into the notion of bionics and robotics. So I think in many ways we've seen such an explosion of innovation that's changing the paradigm of and changing societal consequences.
I think implantables is a space that's really close to my heart. As you know, M.G. Michael and I and our fellow research colleagues and students have been looking at implantables. I started off in 1997, Isabel, when I did my PhD, looking at the transference going from those things that we used to call luggables, those heavy laptops and big phones, and then we moved to something that was more wearable more recently. And yes, I do agree with all the advances occurring in nanotechnology, biomedical devices. We're just at that place where I think we're going to start commercializing those medical devices for non-medical applications. And I think we used to watching the science fiction films when we were younger, into reality today.
Yes. Yes, specifically and related to that, I've been recently publishing on the notion of bionic contact lenses or smart contact lenses that are marketed as a medical device that will be assisting diabetics. But at the same time, there's a great deal of momentum towards non-medical usage and glorification in film. So the notion of these dual-use technologies that sort of enter society and become accepted through one suggested usage, and then we embrace it based on a completely different one is a phenomenon that I think is happening in many different technologies are going through adoption through that process. Yes, and inevitably they're adopted through these processes of celebration that happen with film and video game, and many ways we play out the notion, these difficult concepts, and we begin to adopt them in the games that we play and the narratives that we enjoy. And it's a way that we undergo our adaptation to difficult ideas. Yeah.
Are you saying, Isabel, that possibly we are actualizing those things that we once imagined?
Yeah, I would say that would be one way to term what I think is happening. To flip to another one, for example, the exosuit or the exoskeleton has been celebrated in film since, you know, Aliens and early film, and now we're in sort of the glory days of science fiction technology films like Iron Man, and so many films like Edge of Tomorrow are featuring an exosuit. And I think what's happened is science and technology is trying to definitely is paralleling this process in the real, and we as consumers of this kind of technology and the way that we're celebrating films happening in parallel. So I'm getting a little bit away from myself, but I think we're actualizing technology adoption through film and popular culture.
So your paper is on, and it's a short paper on artificial intelligence, and I'm standing in front of Marvel cartoon figures dating back to the time of Superman. I've got a fantastic collection of sci-fi genre starting back from the late 40s. For example, The Monsters and the Villain, where Superman is fighting the mechanical monsters, and they're pretty much some kind of uninhabited drone figure that can fly and can land and can create. I then would probably show up, of course, the classic Stanley Kubrick 2001: A Space Odyssey, and go forward with Blade Runner, and one of my all-time favorites, which is coming into consciousness today, I guess, is The Matrix.
Yes.
We could go through to The Minority Report.
Yes.
And one that's really close to your paper, which is artificial intelligence. And finally, one that I've just drawn out is iRobot. Now,
yes.
in your paper, you talk about artificial intelligence per se, and focus on two films, that's Her and Ex Machina. Tell us about the whole genre and how it relates to your work.
Well, I think Spike Jonze terms it in an interesting way when he calls the genre slight future, the science fiction of the slight future. So we recognize the setting and the environment very much as our own, in that it's not a far future science fiction world. It's not different than ours. So in the setting, in the buildings, the way that the homes look. But then we see sort of they've been injected with this extremely far future technology when it comes to the AI characters that are living within a sort of a realistic setting. And I think that is one thing that makes them so compelling, because we can imagine our own lives. We can imagine our AI in our own home, in our own school, our own workplace very easily. And I think that is something that really caught my eye with these films, and I got me to sit and wonder and reflect on why are they so compelling, and why are these characters so interesting, and why are they so different than the AI characters I think that we were, you know, dealing with in other films. So I spent some time thinking about HAL, right, from 2001: Space Odyssey. I also thought about Jarvis character from the Iron Man series. How do they match up? And the two characters I'm talking about in Her, it's Samantha, who is basically an operating system. And the other one in Ex Machina, it's a robot character that has an AI personality in Ava. And so I thought a lot about Jarvis and Hal and Ava and Samantha, and tried to come up with a thread in this particular personification of AI, this theme that all of them are friendly, compelling characters that are at home, right? They're situated in a home rather than on a battlefield or in a sort of militarized situation. Although we range out of that a little bit, but there's something about these characters that are at home. And should I go on or should I stop there? Do you want to ask?
No, I want to go on because it's gripping, and I want to hear about the thread.
Okay, so I'm fascinated by, if you think of the history of AI, and I think the goal was ultimately to create a consciousness or a super intelligence that was sort of devoid of emotion and devoid of a personality, and was something that was much more intelligent than us. We were trying to create an AI that would, you know, beat us at chess and solve humankind's problems. But now I think we're very much trying to create an AI who will serve as a companion, and even more so, a caregiver, and ultimately a custodian for us in this world that we're sort of negotiating right now. And the characters that I wrote about they're romantic, right? They are romanticized and framed as sort of companions for lonely men who are sort of a metaphor for, I think, what we are dealing with as a society right now when it comes to technology, and how, you know, technology infiltration in the everyday. And that fascinated me. And I did spend a lot of time comparing the Jarvis character from the Iron Man series, the cinematic Jarvis, who turns into, in the end, into sort of another being ultimately, and backwards in time to Hal, who also is a companion, a friend to those characters, and sort of try to focus in on why, who is Ava, who is Samantha, and why are they different as a conceptualization of AI in the present day.
I find that so fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. I guess I thought I was also interested in the call for the notion of paradox, right? Why, you know, holding two things close together, but they're incommensurable. They can't, and that thing of how the theme that interests me in both of them is they both spent time learning, trying to learn what it means to be a human from their human counterparts, who are both, you know, young men. So by having, through the process of conversation, they went through this sort of discovery, which is, you know, their machine learning process of trying to understand humans. And I think in our dream, the paradox is we hope that we can teach computers to know us through very complex processes. And the reason we want that is we want to have a friend and a companion and a caregiver. But in these films, in both cases, they, you know, either abandon the male character, or, you know, or cause his death, which is the opposite of what we desire, obviously, from our machine friends. So that I thought was a provocative message that both films were making, and they made it differently, obviously. Her was, you know, a tragedy, but not as tragic as Ex Machina. That's ultimately a dystopian thriller, and they were different that way. But I thought there were many things that were very similar, as I've said.
I like your specific thread that's going through all of these, because it does speak to, I guess, intended and unintended consequences. I guess the intentional one is for companionship. The unintended is potentially the abandoned utopian ultimate enemy death scenario. And all of these are somewhat polar opposites. You've got the good and bad, and it was actually Ramona Pringle's idea. Initially, the special was to be called The Dark Side of Technology, and we started to, you know, draw that out a little bit, and Ramona said, hang on a second, something's not sitting right. She said, there are some good things coming out of this AI, and we have to be aware of those unintended consequences and, of course, the intended consequences. And how do we balance the fact that it's not all bad? There are some good things to come out of AI, but then we can look at modern day applications of AI. For example, the most fundamental, I guess, introductory one we all heard about was Siri, Apple's Siri, and more recently Google SmartPly. But then we're getting into some interesting territory with two products I'll mention, Amazon Echo and Hello Barbie. And I've listened to quite a few long YouTubes of people interacting with both devices. And I call them devices. They're somewhat anthropomorphized in the case of Hello Barbie. It's actually a figurine, and Barbie can ask a sister or a brother whether you like your sister and you like fashion. And of course, possibly even in the future, throw in some advertising spiel to your child, but also collect all that data and potentially using the toy natural language processor, understand what's actually happening within the home. It's actually trespassing the boundaries of the home. And as you say in your paper, the thread is the home. You know, we've talked about these in the military and the field, as you say, in the battle space. We've talked about them in the employment operations scenario at the office, but never have we dared to say we will allow these to infiltrate the home. And in the case of Amazon Echo, some of the tapes I've observed on YouTube have had middle-aged men interacting with the Echo device, just a plain black cylinder, you know, about so high. And they're asking it quite intimate questions, getting kicks out of the responses that this processing machine, you know, going to the web, getting the data from the cloud and returning with a response almost instantaneously is giving back to the end user. And you know, we've given it names like the Alexa machine. And I wonder how long it will be before this object becomes some kind of intimate person or thing, you know, subject or object in somebody's home, where they do begin the her scenario of falling in love with the Amazon, because it always responds, it's always patient, you know, it'll always give you the right answer.
Yeah, I think we're at certainly at a moment where we obviously desire to have that kind of personal interaction with our computers, and you've rhymed off some great examples. I think, I mean, the other one that fascinates me is the Jibo robot out of MIT, which we're getting in our lab and we're going to hopefully develop on. And the scenarios for Jibo also are always in the home. Jibo is going to help you with your recipe, and Jibo is going to greet you, you know, when you arrive. And I agree with you that it's quite complex technology, and so many large companies are developing at such a, you know, trying to win this race, the AI race I referred to. But I think, yeah, there's an incredible momentum to have it in our own personal space. And I think that is as a result of another unintended consequence, that internet technology, you know, for 20 years has ended up muddying our lives a lot more than we ever expected. I mean, the intended consequence of the internet was to simplify communication and simplify work and simplify messaging, but we're significantly overwhelmed by those kinds of things that are supposed to ease our lives, right? So we're overwhelmed by our emails, and we're overwhelmed by text, and many are, you know, living life through social media in a manner that is all-consuming. And I think that some of these home-based AIs are trying to mediate and facilitate, or we see our biggest problem is our personal life, not our, you know, that work has infiltrated home, and that, you know, even to live your personal life has so many requirements now that it didn't have before. We need this help from these types of technologies. So that was another thing that I find fascinating. And so as Google makes our lives more complex, they're, you know, countering that with these technologies that are going to help us. But the films play out a world where it doesn't work out the way it was, meant to, with this idea that they're going to evolve or want to evolve. and that fascinated me. And that's not a new theme whatsoever. But that's something else, and I only touched on it as, you know, the ethics, right? How will we deal with all the ethical issues that arise when we bring technology into our personal lives? And whether, or the flip side of that is the ethical situation we will afford our technologies, like the robot ethics. That was also fascinating to me. But for example, what do you do with, you know, if you die, what do you do with the relationship you've built up with AI technology, and, you know, questions of inheritance and questions of all kinds of things like that we haven't even begun to imagine yet how we will deal with it. But
what do you make? There. Yes. So, what do you make of the calls from very high-profile people in the last 12 months regarding what's coming?
Are you referring to, for example, Elon Musk, that
yes.
kind of person who demonized, was afraid of the demon of technology, or was very not afraid of it, that would be not the right word, but skeptical, nervous, negative, and then turned over to believing that we need to commercialize this future. That it fascinates me, and I think it's, I mean, I think it's modeled very much on this notion of distributed innovation and opening technology up to numerous and disparate parties in order to overcome the problems that are so insurmountable with the technology. I think that's a fascinating route to go, but I also think we don't know the whole story yet by any stretch.
Yes.
What do you think?
I'm fascinated because, you know, I was probably in first year university when the internet burst onto the scene in terms of like a WYSIWYG screens and Mosaic Netscape being a browser. And I remember one of them, Payton, coming to me in the corridors of UTS and saying to me, Katina, you've got to go up to level 10 in the tower building. I said, why? He said, you've got to see this thing called the internet. And so I walked into the lab on level 10 and sat down and booted up the browser, and there was a search box there. And next to me, somebody said to me, quick, do you know how to spell amphetamines? And I think it all very quickly came to be, in my mind, internet could be used for, but also over the next hour that I was in that lab, seeing the ease of accessing information and how that developed when I started my first job in 1996 officially, after my university years and co-op positions, and seeing how it affected internal practice in business through intranet. Lotus Notes was big back then. And then, as you say, the extension. So as time went on in my corporate career, I was only young at the time, but I could see, you know, my boss said, how about you have, you know, a mobile on us so that, you know, once you leave the office at 9 p.m., you know, you're safe on your trip home. And then, hey, that you can work after these bids you're involved in. And then it was, you can have a free internet connection, and then you can have a free broadband connection. And so the extension of technology did permeate the home. I think you're very right in your conclusion and analysis of what happened. And now I think we're the victims of our own creation, which is we're over much data. I know in my own self, getting between 500 and 1,000 emails a day doesn't seem humane, and I can't get through everything, and people know that, but you do your best, and that's not going to go away. The volume will just increase with the vectors of information access that we have, or the modes of information transportation. So as you mentioned, the mobile, the texting, the social media, the emails.
Now, I think interesting in the film, in both films, they their home life has been simplified to buy filters. In the case of Ex Machina, Nathan Bateman, who is modeled, I think, on Sergey Brin or some of the other entrepreneurs, the house he has built for himself is isolated, completely isolated, very simplified. Everything that he needs to do is, his life has been there's a smooth transition between everything that he needs and wants to do at home. Interestingly, though, he's imprisoned the AI consciousness within glass. She can't get out. And I thought that was fascinating. I was wondering, you know, our character Caleb is imprisoned, but the robot character is also imprisoned within Nathan's house that he has made. You know, it's his kingdom. He's made it the way he wants it. It's simplified. And I think that is one of our dreams with this technology. Aside from the imprisonment part, that we want to have a life that would be much easier than what we're dealing with now. That we have to work that out. We're in the, as I said in other papers, we're in this era of technogenesis when it comes to some of the technologies we have our hands on, and we foresee a utopian future of having everything much more simplified. And then they play out the danger of it ultimately imprisoning us. But as you say, there are welcome consequences and there are unwelcome ones. And I think they're both playing out simultaneously in a fascinating way.
Yes, in fact,
yeah.
Your reference to Ex Machina there, the encapsulation and imprisonment of this object, this thing, right, as if it's going to get up and run away and escape from the house. Yeah. When I was in Canada in 2000, I visited the National Art Gallery there in Ottawa, and I was very inspired by one particular work in the modernist section where it actually showed a person imprisoned on the outside of a motherboard. So imagine an oblong shape, 3D shape, where an individual's face is plastered and is on the edge of the motherboard. So you can see this flat face imprisoned within a motherboard, and it spoke so much, and it just reminded me of what you said for Ex Machina. And I think sometimes that's how we do feel, that our life is somewhat minimalist. We just need our laptop or just that, you know, the iPad, and off we go, and we've got everything, you know.
Yes.
But the second we don't have Wi-Fi access, the second we've lost that object, the second we've parted ways with this thing that seems to encapsulate all of ourselves and our relationships, we freak out.
Terror, right? There's terror for a moment, and terror and loneliness and fear of how we're going to play out this next hour without that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I have to go see that. I haven't seen that piece, and I'm definitely going to.
Great.
Yeah.
What do you think, Isabel, is a solution, or more precisely, the risks? What are the risks that can help us in starting to consider solutions before we even know what's coming exactly?
I think the risk is, and we touched on this earlier, the notion of dual use technology that is being considered only for its single use. And so what I mean by that is a field or profession building a technology for something very important that we need, for example, the medical industry, but then not talking to, say, people who are social scientists or communications theorists and practitioners who understand, well, what will this technology, what kinds of change and unintended consequences will it bring about in other fields? And we need to begin to talk about it, I think, a little bit more across the board before we embrace technologies. I gave a talk to high school students very recently on digital telepathy. So the idea, you know, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg is talking, he mentioned that he would like to he believes he will see a day when there will be digital telepathy. And Intel, had been talking about a day when we will have implants and we will be able to send our thoughts to each other through technology, but just using our brain without going through keyboards and mice and any tech like that. My message to them, to the high school students, was you have the chance to understand the motive behind these ideas and deal with the fact that while they might be wonderful and very important for one field, you need to ask yourself, how will they impact other ones? And this is something that we do in many other professions, right? For engineers who are going to be designing a bridge, they're asked to imagine all of the consequences to make a safe bridge ahead of time. How will a bridge be made? Or an architect does the same thing with building and structuring a building. And when doctors are planning to cure patients, you have to imagine all of the consequences. And I don't think we're yet asking our technology companies to necessarily think ahead about what they're bringing into society. And we aren't, as consumers, necessarily asking what change means in a profound way. So that is another technology that fascinates me and plays into AI as well, the notion of telepathy. But I don't know if I answered. Yeah.
Oh, you did. I think you did very well, because I think the dialogue is not there amongst engineers. Many of the engineers, and I'm an associate dean in an engineering faculty, most people I do stop and talk to in the corridor will say we'll worry about ethics after the prototyping stage and not even before.
Yeah.
And I find that difficult to communicate otherwise, that actually right at the idea stage of an innovation process, it doesn't happen at the diffuse stage. There's an intentionality in why we build certain things and whether they have use values or not that we are aware of and we have built into the products. And of course, how they might be misused by the general population, is as far as the mind might stretch. But I think get involved in the idea of value and what is the value of the things that they are creating.
Yeah, and I also think that social sciences and humanities also has to step up and go to conferences they're not comfortable going to and engage with engineering and computer science. And it's a partnership, and I think that would help. Cross-disciplinary research.
You're right, and it's hard because we're being siloed into publishing in particular types of venues because that's how publications are counted by government and by ranking processes. And I find that's one of the bottlenecks at the moment. I know in Europe, they're trying to really break down the divide between the social scientists and the engineers, and they are working jointly on projects. For example, the editor-in-chief of Robotics and Automation magazine, whom I was speaking to last week, Bram said to me, Katina, we're looking at how machines can be used to help autistic children, that is robots. And we are working with social sciences that are asking some very challenging questions, but at the same time, they need to grasp exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're building these systems and so forth. And we're coming up with a proposal jointly between Technology and Society and Robotics and Automation magazine where we're going to push that might be within two different flavors, one more a social science flavor for TNS, and then the more technical one with some social science inbuilt for Automation and Robotics magazine. But interestingly, as well, I think your point about brain-to-brain interfaces and this telepathy notion, again, is not new. I was working at Nortel Networks Australia and traveling through Canada and Europe back in 1997 when Peter Cochrane of British Telecom wrote a book and talked about the soul catcher chip. And at the time, Nortel was producing handsets, you know, not like this one, but a little bit different in size and weight. And Nortel decided to stop manufacturing mobile phones. And this was through the 2G space. And we weren't talking about second generation mobile at the time. And I asked my boss, why, you know, when this is supposed to be the next biggest thing, why are we stopping the manufacture? And of course, there were things to do with typical cost-benefit analysis and core competencies, and we were more a networks provider than a mobile handset provider.
Yes.
But in actual fact, some of our close relations worked for British Telecom, and we were being told, forget this, because you're going to have something in here that's going to allow you to transmit information. And it was called BBI, brain-to-brain interface.
Yes.
And today we do have BCI, brain-to-computer interfaces. But you're right, it's all mixed together when we look at AI.
Yeah. Right. AI will be a facet that pushes all of that, will instigate and generate, I think, the missing link of so many of these technologies that, you're right, have been imagined and conceptualized for decades. And one thing I find is what I find I face is when I started working on wearables back, you know, in 1999, told over and over again, well, that won't happen, that won't happen, no one will do that, that won't happen. And I kept going, kept researching, kept collecting, and, you know, wrote my dissertation on it. And then immediately Google announced Google Glass and everything changed, but we weren't ready necessarily to deal with so many of the issues with technology. You know, it was almost as if the technologists were willing to suspend disbelief because they're working on small components and advancements, but in the social sciences, until we were convinced that it was going to be a medium of communication that we were all going to embrace, they weren't going to deal with it as a real problem. So you're right that there's so many problems about our siloed disciplines and hindrances in all of us working together, that is just a problem we have to overcome. Because I think in many circles, if I said, well, I want to dedicate a lot of time to telepathy and digital telepathy, technologists would say, well, there's so many problems to overcome, but we will overcome them. So I think in the social sciences, we would just be skeptical until it actually happened. And yeah, so it's a problem. Although the way I try to deal with it is deal with what I see as the precursors. So we, like many labs, are using consumer-grade EEG devices to come up with what I think are the precursors. And mine, I'm interested in art, in imagining. Can we use those devices to enjoy art or go through a process of subjective selection of art using EEG? And I think that might be one of the precursors to how, you know, a system of practices and interface interactions that will have to be developed for things like digital telepathy, like the code of meaning that will have to be transformed. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but.
No, I think this conversation is going in a very interesting direction. You know, Isabel, even back at, I think we went through some similar things there. In 1987, when I started my PhD and I was working in the workforce, my boss from Nortel would often ask me, you know, how are you going in the topic? How's your PhD going? I'll come and hear your proposal hearing. And they really weren't sure whether I was a nutcase or whether I was really at the edge, at the leading edge of the next phase of technologies. I was sure, having looked at animal RFID devices, that they would soon be made, you know, put into humans at that time. And by the time I finished my PhD, that final year, we had a company very cheap on the New York Stock Exchange that was commercializing its personal health record ID chip. So it was real to me, but I believe even as far back as 2007, there were engineers in engineering conferences who would challenge me and my husband, say, what you're talking about doesn't exist. And I think this misnomer, or this divide even within the engineering and social sciences community that says, you're too far-fetched, you know, you're going down 30 years from now, we're only worried about today, is really ignorant, because the military, the commercial institutions and organizations you've mentioned already, they're hot on this stuff, and we have to get with the questioning now before I think things start to permeate and we have less of a control or a say about how our future might look.
Exactly. You're right. We are sometimes hindered with these studies, despite the fact that, for example, yes, DARPA's their memory chip, they're trying to develop also a brain chip, and for me, that is, you know, strong indicator that we need to dedicate a lot of resources to understanding the consequences for the everyday person. And you're absolutely right. I mean, what I've written about in other places is the notion of a memory chip. They've been dealing with that for a long time with their life log applications. Yeah. And many of the things that they were presupposing then have completely emerged as consumer devices now. Wearable cameras and like, you know, cameras that are taking photographs constantly throughout the day have become consumer grade devices. And yeah, we need to overcome our fear of studying things that seem far-fetched by some. Yeah, or we need to enter that you know, the study of futurism, futurology, whatever we call it, into our sort of more conservative venues and deal with them, I think, a little bit more with more responsibility. Yeah. And well, I think...
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I find it interesting in engineering that you face that, because I finished my degrees in English, and they accepted, you know, the crossover with dystopian fiction, for example, or I could range into that kind of discussion, but they did not necessarily believe that any of it would have been a reality, and much of what is a reality now, they would have given me a hard time of it then. But I find that interesting that you faced that when you must have had the technology that you were using in your hands, that you were developing as an engineer. And that's very interesting.
Thank you. Well, Isabel Pedersen, it's been such an absolute pleasure working on this special with you, and please thank Samantha Reed for us as well. I hope we get to work together in the near future, and you're a leading voice in this space, so thanks for all the research that you and your lab are doing.
Thank you so much, Katina, and thank you to MG as well, and it's been wonderful to communicate with you, and I appreciate your work so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night. Bye-bye.